Hello everyone, this is Jimmy Cultist, and today we're going to be doing a little tutorial on how to animate / create a growing tree effect. This is by request. I have already done sort of a little prototype. This is going to be slightly different though. It's not going to be looped this time, but I will be addressing how you would create a looped effect briefly near the end of the video. But for the time being, I'm just going to address how you would animate a tree growing in the first place. I've supplied all my components. We have the trees, the branches, and this big trunk right here. And we have dirt. But the first thing we're going to need, with animation, sometimes you need a guide for placement. So just stamp out a cylinder using stamp shape, put it upright. Fun fact, when you stamp out a cylinder upright, it automatically is the center of any kaleidoscope you might want to use, so keep that in mind if you're making an object where you want to use the kaleidoscope effect. Or is it it's just kaleidoscope. But I'm going to be using the kaleidoscope to find the exact center. Basically, when all of these white lines intersect, you're at the exact center of any given object, provided it's upright. Now this is going to be a guide for our tree when it's fully grown. I just need a little something to, tell me where things are going to be. And I'm going to cut out the center just so we can see things a little clearer. But that's my guide. Brighten it up a little bit. This is completely unnecessary since it's going to be invisible, but we will be seeing it outside. Don't forget to make it non-collidable. We will be able to see it when we turn on preview invisibility. But anyway, we're going to start with this dirt. I've taken the liberty of already making a dirt asset, which all I did was use kaleidoscope on a cylinder and kind of round it out with sculpting, and add some little dots here and there using the smear tool. Smear shape. But now that that's done, I have this little invisible wheel which is connected by a bolt to the clod of dirt down the center. You might need to readjust it depending on how you want it to move. Make it invisible. And don't forget to make the clod of dirt collide with none of these labels, and to label it a machine. This is so it won't collide with the floor or anything else I've set up, and it itself is a machine so it won't collide with other machines, or at least things that are labeled machine. And these little bits here, I want them to collide with the dirt, but I don't want them to collide with anything else. So I've made it so they don't collide with scenery. And since the ground is labeled scenery, they'll just pass through the ground, which is what I want. But I want them to move on this lump of dirt here. Now we're going to go ahead and group these. As you can see, it doesn't look very good right now. Kind of looks like a big old turd. But essentially, this is going to be a dirt effect. And it will look considerably less turdy as we modify it. Let's go ahead and put a microchip down here. Put down a timeline, set it to loop. Now you may have noticed these little dots, which I've already set up. I'm going to use an emitter to emit them on top of the dirt pinwheel, or whatever you want to call it. And let's just go ahead and turn off invisibility. Set the emit speed just a tiny little bit, so they sort of fly upwards. Set it to the back, so it's sort of like coming out. And you can decide how quickly you want this effect to loop or not by changing the length of the timeline. But anyway, essentially that's what we're dealing with, just a little pebble effect right there. We might just hook up a node for later, in case we decide to change this. Now let's go ahead and use our guide to set up a ring of dirt. Kind of lower them down in case you begin to lose the focus of your dirt circle. It's easy to copy things with L1 and R2. Hopefully this doesn't overrun our scene. Let's take a look. Seems to be running okay. Now we're going to balance it out just a bit, make it more level. Now, if you're interacting with objects and you don't want to accidentally, mess around with the environment, there's a tool called Freeze, which basically, when you click R2 on something, it freezes it, and you can press R2 again to unfreeze it, but essentially that makes it impossible for you to accidentally delete or alter the position of something you don't want altered. Very handy sometimes. I'm going to move this up just a tad. I think I kind of like this higher. Alright, so that's our dirt. And if we want to hook up these emitters later, that's something we can do. But this is our dirt circle. It exists purely to, operate. When the trees are growing, you need the effect that the soil is being pushed up, and that's what that achieves, pretty much. So to start, we're going to put out a little chip. This is going to be the basis of most of what we do. You might want to use grid snap, so that it's aligned, with the compass, north and south, or whatever, right side up. Don't want it at an odd angle. Okay. So, let's move over to another aspect of this whole thing. By the way, since since we're done with these, don't delete this though. This is very important if you want to start those emitters up later. But we're going to move on to animating trees. First thing we're going to start with is these saplings. So I want you to stamp out an invisible square. It's not invisible right off the bat, but it will be invisible later. And this square is going to act as the basis of our animation. Just go ahead and copy this brick. This is going to be the exact height of the tree when it's fully grown. We're going to use that as a guide. Now, these things are completely unnecessary. You can pretty much make it look any way you want, since it's not going to be visible. The main thing is, just don't have it collidable and don't have it visible. And it's going to act as a guide, so you might want to make it a really bright color so that you can pick it out from everything else. And we're going to copy it so that if we want to group it to other things, it's less laborious. Also, if you're trying to control the graphics thermo, use this tool to reduce the detail with R2. It's good if you want to avoid having unnecessary graphics spent. Okay, I think that's good enough. Let's copy this. Now, I've taken the liberty of already grouping these objects. These are actually separate groups. These bushes or leaves or whatever you want to call them are separate objects from the limbs. And the central growing point is going to be this trunk. You'll see that these limbs are separate. I'm going to go ahead and scope the bushes into the limbs. Alright, we're done with that. So, these limbs are separate. Of course, this one needs a bush on it, so I might as well go ahead and do that. Okay, so we got all of our limbs ready. Just scope in and you can see that we can move them around, and they're cut off from the main trunk for a very specific reason. Now we're going to scope outside the entire group, put down this chip. This is going to be our tree's animation. Set down a timeline. Set down a timer. And we're going to take the timer's timer output, and hook it up to this thing, which is called a playhead. Make sure that this is on sustain. And it's really quite simple. Just going to put down a keyframe. Copy it out. Now what this keyframe is going to do is essentially we're just going to artificially shrink our tree. Gonna go in here and take these limbs, shrink them down. Scope in once to shrink down the foliage. Gonna shrink it really tiny so it can barely be seen. And we got these leaves so that it looks like it's, initially just has some budding leaves or whatever. Now we're going to shrink this down to where it's really pretty minute, pretty tiny. Going to do the same with this one. And of course we're going to shrink down the foliage. Now we're going to do the same with this big center limb. Going to make it real small. And there is like a slight discrepancy. You can see the cut. But really, in full motion, that's not such a big deal. Now just shrink down this foliage. Make it pretty minute. Hard to see. You want to kind of stay toward the center of the sculpt if possible. That way when it animates, it's a little bit more balanced. Alright, so to give you an idea about what this is going to look like in play mode, if we just let our timer run, I'm going to set it to target time 3.0. Alright, now we're going to let it run so you can see what's going to go down. That's what our tree is going to be doing. Also, do this, just move that little bit there and lengthen the keyframe, that way it starts out a bit smoother. Now the advantage to this is we can pretty much have it at the least grown state possible from the very beginning. Now we're gonna, gonna put out a separate keyframe. We might as well go ahead and make it longer and just pull this in real quick since we're gonna be doing that anyway. And pull this backwards so that when it finishes, you know, just a little bit neater that way. It's not really necessary. But we're going to go ahead and shrink the entire tree. Be sure that you're scoped out so that none of these limbs are selectable, but the whole tree is. And then just shrink it down to an extremely minute size. Might need to turn off preview invisibility for this. But that's going to be the basic size. You could make it even smaller if you want it to pop out of the ground. But there you go. You got a tree. And you can control the speed by simply altering the time on this. If you want it to go slower or longer, it can be done. Which we may be doing later. But for the time being, we're just going to leave it at that. And we're going to go ahead and do this to all of the other trees, of course. Now, real quick, because Dreams added the invisible connectors guide, if you want to get rid of an animation that's connected to an older object, like if you're copying a keyframe and you want to put something new in it, just delete these wires. Just press X and you'll see all the connectors. These are the invisible connections, the animations. Just delete the wires. And you've got a completely blank keyframe to work with. We're going to go ahead and use the same process we used before, just with this tree instead of the last one. One real quick word of warning, don't shrink things down too small. There's a point at which if you shrink things too small, I think Dreams has trouble processing them, so try to avoid that. Another thing I might do is make the keyframe that animates your tree its general size, make it a different color than the one that animates the limbs. Let's go ahead and check out its growth. It looks pretty good. Now we're going to go ahead and do the same thing with the next one. Let's go ahead and preview these again. Seem to be growing in, although there's a slight discrepancy with this particular limb where it's kind of shifting out of place. In order to offset that, I'm going to make it taller. A little bit more to the side. I'll see if it plays okay. Yeah, that's better. Now to start these all up, we're going to hook up these little nodes to the start timer input. Make sure you're scoped out. It's not entirely an issue as long as you're working within microchips, but you just want to be scoped out in case. Don't want to forget what zone you're in. Gonna stamp out a trigger zone. Set it to tag. Set the tag to thin tree grow. So if it detects a tag anywhere in the scene, because we set it to the entire scene as the trigger zone, if it detects a tag labeled that, it will begin growing the tree. You could even set it so that these are positional, if you wanted to. You could set it so that when the tag is active or inactive, they stop growing. So let's try thin tree grow. We're going to let it play halfway, and then they'll shrink back down. There's another way to do it. I think it's countdown. Maybe it's speed. Let's see what that does. Yeah, speed. If you set it to speed, they'll grow halfway, but not all. So keep that in mind depending on what kind of effect you're trying to achieve. So, now that that's all done, we've got our first group of thin trees ready to grow. But we have another problem, which is these limbs, which are going to be attached to the big tree. So let's go ahead and get started on those. The process is going to be very similar with a slight difference. I'm going to stamp out a piece of material, same as before. Make it invisible, non-collidable and such. Oh, and another thing to keep in mind, before you put any of these tree assets together, don't forget to make them not collide with any of these, at least for the way I have it set up in this scene. I don't want them to collide with the dirt particles as they're growing, so And as far as labels are concerned, don't even bother labeling them, because if you just make it so the dirt particles don't collide with things that are unlabeled, that already solves that problem. Basically, if you turn off this, anything that's unlabeled won't collide. Actually, we should delete this. Let's go ahead and reduce the detail a little bit. But the reason why we're going to want to delete it is because you always want the microchip to be on the outside of whatever given thing, whatever given group. You want the microchip to be on the outside so it won't move with anything. But our process is going to be pretty similar. Might as well set it to speed right off the bat. Put down a timeline. Set it to sustain. Usually they're on sustain already. Timer output. Hook up to the playhead. And as you can see, this is pretty much the same song and dance. Put out a node. Set it to linear, copy it out. Might as well copy it out twice, since you're going to need it twice. And just copy this one. Make it gray on top. You don't really have to do that, but that's just the way I choose to do it. Now that these are a group, we're going to start by animating these little limbs that come off here are going to be important. Go ahead and scope them into whatever group the bushes are in. Now let's begin doing the animating. With some of these foliages, they're going to be disconnected from the smaller limbs because these limbs are static, they're not separate. I chose to do that with these so that they'd kind of have a general shape already when they start sprouting out of the tree. All you have to do is kind of reduce the size of these just a tiny bit. It's only with these disconnected ones that you're going to have to go in and modify. You might not even have to modify the size of the foliage because we kind of want these limbs to start out with a little bit more foliage right from the get-go. It's a little bit different. But if you wanted to, you could shrink down all the, various bits and it wouldn't be a big deal. You could pretty much mirror the same thing we did over there. Now we're going to want to be scoped out so that we have the entire group, just as before. I'm going to shrink it down, pull it in here. Now let's go ahead and test and see how this plays out. I'm going to take a NOT gate and hook it up to the node just temporarily to see how it grows. I'm going to make the branch tilt down slightly so that it kind of feels like it's growing upward. See, it kind of comes up and over. You could get a lot of effect by tilting it all the way down. Let's try and see what that looks like. Good upward movement, nice for growing. So that's pretty much that. And we're going to copy the same process with all of these trees. Okay, I think we got everything hooked up. Now, one particular issue that there might be with these trees, when the limbs are growing, we want to hook up a zone, but this time it's not going to be set to in scene. Instead, we're going to set it very thin, but goes very far in both the X and Z axis. And what it detects is grow limbs. That's the target tag. And what we're going to want is, when they pass a certain threshold, the limbs begin growing. That way they don't grow prematurely and start sticking out in the dirt in a very annoying way. We could just copy out these zones for easy access. I think that's all of them that we have. Just move this red brick over to the side. But now we're going to start with the big stuff. So first off, what we're dealing with is this thing. This tree is a group in advance. So I'm just going to go ahead and take all these little things, scope in once, you can scope in by holding R2 when you're copying something, and then just pressing L1 and X. It's just L1 and X if you're not copying something, but I'm copying something, so... Oh, make sure these branches are pointed inward as much as possible. You don't want their rear end sticking out the other end, if possible, and you don't want them facing inward so that they grow into the tree instead of out of the tree. I'm not sure, but I think this should be it. Also, for future reference, it might be better to make these slightly different colors. Just so we can tell them apart from one another. That way you know exactly what kind of limb you're getting. We're going to go ahead and take a tag and experiment with these. Grow limbs, just to see that they're working properly. They seem to be growing okay, although that one's a bit far out. We're going to have to move that in. and shrink it down some. Another thing, because we want them to trigger and just keep going, we're going to set it to count up. We don't want them to stop, so take it off of the speed setting. Once they pass the tag, it needs to continuously count down, and if you just set it to count up, it should do that automatically. Anyway, let's go ahead and test it. We'll move this out. Okay, they're still growing. And we're going to go ahead and modify all these, since we know we're going to be needing them later, to count. And we're going to go ahead and copy out this brick. And this is going to be the base of our tree. Going to set this to be the top. It's going to tell us how tall it needs to grow before it's reached maximum height. Make it a slightly different color too. Green should do nicely. Now we're going to group that. And just as before, we're going to put a little microchip on the outside. And we're going to test how this thing goes down. Now there's one other thing we're going to do. This is going to be the top of the tree. So just go ahead. We're going to scope this in real quick. Put it up here. It's going to be like a canopy, I suppose you'd call it. And as before, we're going to be putting out a timeline and a timer, but we're going to set this timer speed slower so that it has a more gradual rate of growth. And we're going to set it to speed. This time, I think that's a good idea. Connect this to the playhead as before. And we're just going to go ahead and put down a keyframe, set it to linear, copy it out, stretch it, pull this back for smoother animation time. And we're going to add a little bit of a twist from the other trees. When we shrink it down, also turn it just a little bit. Just twist it a little bit to this, maybe that many degrees. Pull it down till it's barely visible. And it'll turn as it goes up automatically. We're going to take one other little liberty, put down a tag, grow limbs. This is the point. You can basically adjust this tag. Whatever point you want the limbs to start growing, this is where it will be. So we're going to try about there. You can see them coming out. Very brilliant, very wonderful. Of course, this beg pardon. This tree is a little bit misaligned, so turn that around a bit. Cool thing about this is when they reset, you can easily just, also that's completely wonky, shouldn't be out like that. You can adjust these things though, won't affect the keyframes. The issue we're running into is the backsides are visible, so an alternative to this problem just to shrink them down a tad. Push them in just a little bit. Also, if you had the tree limbs grow early, that might be another idea. Let's try with the tree limbs growing earlier than before, so that there's less time for the player to notice that there's a discrepancy. It is, after all, just an illusion. Yeah, I think that works. We'll go with that. Another possibility is you could go in here and correct each of these. You could basically go like this. Just shrink it down way more. And you pretty much got the problem sorted. We'll go ahead and do that just for the sake of making it look nice. Alright, let's test it. Perfect. No discrepancies. Now we're just going to go ahead and dupe this out with some minor alterations. And this will cost you a little bit of thermo because of all the animations involved, but if you want a big, brilliant, growing tree, I suppose you gotta make a few sacrifices. There's simpler ways of doing this. I'm just kind of detailing the most visually pleasing methodology, but not necessarily the only method. Now with this variation, we're going to put a few more at the very top to kind of go along with the canopy. Speaking of which, there's one tiny thing I forgot to do with the first one, and you may have noticed this. Silly me, I forgot to correct the issue. But basically, you're going to want your canopy up there. Go ahead and hide the secondary one, because we don't really want that in here just yet. Set it right there, or let's just set the timer right there, just so I can tell what's grouped with what. Never mind, I guess that's impossible. Alright, so that's the whole trunk. Alright, I think we're in the right grouping. Essentially what you're going to do is just shrink this down. Oh, don't move the... don't move that around, okay? Don't move the microchip. That's a very bad idea. Just going to put this on the tip of the tree. We're going to let this play out to see how it goes. Yep, that seems pretty nice to me. And we're going to go ahead and do the same thing with our second one, since we forgot to do that. Speed! One minor thing to note, real quick. If you twist this around a few degrees, it'll probably twist with the tree, which is probably something you want, so go ahead and twist it just a little bit. See, it kind of moves with the tree. That's a little bit more natural. I'm going to go ahead and do that with the first one. Alright. So we're ready. we're going to set this even longer. I want it to be just a tad longer so that it comes up just a little bit slower. Okay. We got our big trees. Now it's time for our little trees. Also, we might as well hook up our zones real quick. Big tree or thick tree, whichever one you prefer. Big tree grow is going to be our targeted tag. And just as before, we're going to set this to detect the entire scene so that wherever our tag is, it can be found. And now I think we're practically ready for business. There is one other minor detail, and that's to group the entire dirt circle. And there's a reason to my madness with this, so just give me a chance to explain it. Take out a keyframe. We're going to go in here, and we're going to pull this down just a tiny bit. Don't do it too much. And do it every other one, so it's sort of like an inner tube. Okay. I guess maybe here we're going to have to do more than just every other one, because there's not an even number, but who cares? Now pull this one down, and just press triangle on these ones. Pull down, press triangle, pull down, press triangle, pull down, press triangle, pull down, press triangle, pull down, press triangle. Pull down, I don't really know. I think that one does go down. So, maybe have an even number of dirt lumps if you're doing this. But basically what this is going to do is give the effect that, you know, it's being pushed up and it's uneven. It's sort of, you know, it's not quite neat and tidy. Gonna do this, hook this up for dirt. That way we can decide when we want dirt and when we don't want it. And I'm not going to do it with every single one, because you don't want too many dynamic objects, movable objects, I suppose you would call them. You don't want a ton of movable objects in your scene all at once, so I'm only going to hook this up to a few. Just keep that in mind. Also, you're not going to be able to see behind the tree for this, so maybe don't hook it up to too many rear-facing ones. And we're going to give it a little test to see how the dirt comes out. Yeah, that seems to be working okay. Alright. Delete that. Now you may wonder why we grouped all the dirt when we could have animated it separately. That's because this ring, as the trees grow bigger, is going to grow out. We're also going to slow these down just a little bit. I think maybe 3 is a bit fast, so let's go for more like 9. And we're going to give them a little test to see how speedy they grow. I guess, though, we could actually just test that in practice. So let's make this slightly different color. and make this one slightly different so that we can kind of tell the difference between them. And we might need to, ironically, just delete our guide a little bit. Not the top part, but we need the ring still. I don't think we'll need as much the top as the bottom. Let's move this out of the way so we don't get confused. It's not an actual tree, it's just a guide. We'll put this over here. Okay, so gonna take this, copy it. The reason why I copy is just in case I need to delete them for whatever reason. I don't want to delete the original and have it lost, especially if I forget to save. Now we're going to put out a big old grand timeline, set it to sustain. You could also set it to play once though, it doesn't matter. We're going to label this tree growth. It's not too important what you label it. You could leave it unlabeled if you wish, but this is just so that we remember what it is we're even doing. Thin tree grow is going to be our first tag. Let's give it a test and see how it comes out. Alright, that's not enough. We're going to want them to grow to full height. I might just take off this. Set it to count. And of course, we're going to have to modify these. Okay, we made a tiny mistake. We didn't hook up these nodes to the start timer input, so let's just go ahead and do that. And we'll check out the thin trees and see how they grow. That's pretty good. I like that. Nice gradual growth. Now that that's done, we're going to do a little modification. You can put out another one of these, another timer. Gonna leave it on count. Oh, don't put out a keyframe, just put out a node. Well, not a node. We will need a node, but that comes later. Just put it on sustain, timeline, hooked up to the playhead, same as before. Set it to linear. Now what this is going to control is our dirt. Our dirt ring can shrink it. Oh, there seems to be an issue. This little fella is out of the group. But now he's back in, so it really doesn't matter. But we're going to go ahead and shrink down this thing, just as I said before. This is one instance in which our guide might be just a little bit annoying. We're also going to put some layers to this animation, so it's not just, you know, gotta have some transition to it. Alright, let's try that out. Something doesn't seem to be going right. This should be going up. I'm not sure why it was going down like that. Hopefully we don't have an issue. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and make this pretty long. Till the trees are finished growing. I guess we could reduce the time, and that would be a simpler method. Let's just go ahead and do that. Or I should say increase the time. Let's see how quickly that grows. We'll set it to 15. I think that's good. Also, reset the current time, because apparently I accidentally messed with that. You can also add sound effects to make this a little bit more realistic, maybe. Let's see the exact point. Cool thing about timelines is you can see the exact point that an animation ends. Alright, they become fully grown trees right about here. So, that precise area is about where we're going to want our big tree grow. Although we're going to want our big trees for that process, and we don't have them in place just yet. Let's move them over here so they don't visually clutter things. And we're going to copy right here. These are going to cost us a little thermo, as before. It's no picnic, okay? So just keep that in mind. Let's go back. Color code these. Keep forgetting to do that. Alright, now we know the difference between that variation and this variation. Can go ahead and put that there. And you can resize them so that there's some slight differences when they grow to their full height. And we're going to go ahead and copy out this green fellow here. And we're going to do a twist where we make him bigger, right about here. Pull it down. Gonna make this one smaller. Okay, so let's go ahead and see our process and see how it goes. We're having some kind of mangled issue here. I think I know what it is. It's the dirt. I'm not sure why the dirt is doing this. We might make it non-collidable. It's not what I wanted, but it's probably what I'm going to have to do. We seem to have fixed that issue. And we're having a bit of a sticker overload, but that is because I chose this particular artistic approach, which uses stickers. There's probably more thermo-effective ways you could have done it, like if I had grouped these all, it wouldn't be a big problem, but who cares? Alright, let's see how it goes. Now, something is not entirely, some of these I think I may have shrunk too much. I wasn't aware that I shrunk them to that insane degree. But anyway, that's more the size I should be, so let's test it out with that in mind. Okay. We're gonna have to put these very far down into the ground. Another way we could have done it was to shrink their animation, like just make their shrinking animation smaller, but this ought to do just fine. How much of them are underground? That is my question. There's a substantial amount of trunk that shouldn't be down there. Something about this process is not working as intended. Okay, so our problem was incredibly simple. This timer was not set to count up, which is very crucial. Now we're going to go ahead and shrink this down and reset this whole thing. Alright, that should fix all of our problems. Let's watch it play out. Skip ahead on the timeline. Now a quick word of advice about these trees. If you want to save on stickers, I have these individual, things copied out, but it would probably be better to just go like this. Oh. Copy this out. Select everything except for the sticker. It can be kind of difficult getting a hold of these. Well, I'll just select everything but this bush and delete. But basically you could just stick it on a whole group and save a lot of sticker, you know? Delete all the individual ones on the inside and just stick it on the outside, and that would save you a lot of time and hardship, so keep that in mind. You could especially do it with these ones in the background. I'm not going to bother doing that in this particular video. Anyway, here's another way we could go ahead and do our tree now that we've solved our issue. Let's just go ahead and size it up as it will be when it's fully grown. That's gonna be our tree when it's fully grown. Oh, did it really? Oh, great. We're gonna not do it that way. The reason being is if you copy something out after it's begun, there's a bit of a issue where it's already been triggered, so the thing counts it as fully triggered. It doesn't matter. Let's just reverse the scene and we'll do it this way. Might need to unfreeze our ground just so we can hide it. Could have probably had less limbs also on some of these, because when it grows up it gets pretty bunchy. Let's go ahead and hide our guide. Let's go ahead and delete some of these lower limbs. We're gonna not need so many. Anyway, now let's give it a try and see how it grows. We got the first saplings. And you want them to preferably pull this back just a little bit. You don't want them to finish growing by the time the big trees come out. That way it feels like, you know, it's not stop-starty, it's continual motion. There you have it. A fully grown tree. Let's go ahead and hide some of our elements so that we can get a good look at it. Alright, let's see it in action. Pretty sweet. Another thing you could do is have it so that these trees shrink when the big ones get bigger, so that they kind of pull in and it's sort of like a natural illusion. But I'm not going to go that far. I think this is good enough. I think that looks pretty nice. So, hopefully you found this helpful. There is a way to loop this. There is a way to loop it. It requires that you make the trees more seamless, so I might, like, do the roots differently, make them separate, and make them only grow to a point before stopping. But essentially all you would do is you would have an emitter endlessly emit the trees, and then as they would go out of your field of view, they would have a timeline like this, like these timelines, except there would be a destroyer at the end. And the destroyer would destroy the entire group, so it would be an endlessly growing tree, just like I had in my initial video, which I posted to Twitter. But it's pretty much the same as that. And it's really not that hard to do that. For all intents and purposes, though, that's the entire lowdown on how to make a tree grow that way. This creation will be remixable after this video comes out, so if you want to mess around or use it in any way you see fit, feel free to do so. Check the description for information on how to find it in Dreams. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And if you want to support us, check the links in the description to our art pal and our coffee. You can also follow me on Twitter if you like dreams content and unique and entertaining takes. In the meantime, goodbye.